the ocean holds secrets that still defy all logic today. Sounds without origin, impossible ruins, creatures that should not exist. Get ready to dive into the deepest and most unsettling mysteries of the planet. This is not fiction. This is happening now, beneath the water. The Bloop Sound, the roar from the depths. In the summer of 1997, something shook the depths of the Pacific Ocean. It was so powerful, so strange, and so colossal that the scientists monitoring the NOAA hydrophone network, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, were left speechless. On the maps, the sound was recorded with a simple yet enigmatic name: Bloop. The simplicity of the word contrasts with the immensity of what it represents. It was not just a sound, it was a presence. An echo that emerged from the liquid entrails of the planet, captured thousands of kilometers away by multiple underwater sensors. No one, not even the experts in underwater acoustics, could identify its origin with certainty. The only clear thing was that it came from somewhere near the coordinates of the South Pacific, not far from Antarctica, and that it had a power that defied what was known. The most unsettling thing about the bloop was not its volume, although it was enormous, nor even its duration, which lasted several minutes. It was its sound profile. When played at increased speed, it almost sounded like a biological noise. It resembled a monstrous moan, a living vibration, like the distant cry of a creature that inhabits where light has never touched. The hydrophones, originally installed to detect Soviet submarines during the Cold War, were designed to register nuclear explosions or tectonic movements. But this was not an explosion, it was not an earthquake, and apparently, it was not a whale either. The profile of the bloop has an acoustic signature that vaguely resembles that of some marine animals, such as large blue whales or sperm whales. But the problem is that its intensity was thousands of times greater. If it had been emitted by a living creature, its size would have to be colossal, something many times larger than any known marine creature. And that is where the mystery thickens. Could something like that, so enormous, exist in the depths of the ocean without us ever having seen it? To get an idea of the scale of the sound, it is enough to point out that it was detected by sensors located more than 5,000 kilometers apart from each other. That kind of propagation does not happen with common sounds. The bloop had a power beyond any known biological or mechanical scale. Unlike a submarine engine or underwater volcanic activity, which usually have predictable frequencies, this sound had a modulation, a fluctuation that resembled the acoustic patterns of living beings. But no known living being could have generated it, at least not under the laws of biology as science understands them. NOAA, after years of analysis, chose to lean toward one hypothesis: a series of ice quakes, that is, large blocks breaking off from glacial platforms and plunging into the water, could generate a sound of that magnitude. It is a plausible theory. Ice quakes do exist and can produce intense acoustic signals. But there is one detail that leaves many experts uncomfortable. Ice quakes do not usually emit sounds with such organic profiles, so similar to those of a creature. Furthermore, this event has not been repeated with the same characteristics. No other known ice rupture has produced anything similar to the bloop. As usually happens with the planet's most intense mysteries, much bolder interpretations soon emerged. Some imagined that the sound belonged to a gigantic creature, a species yet to be discovered that lives in the deepest regions of the ocean. A beast of almost mythological proportions, perhaps a relic from a time before humans, still down there, waiting. This idea, although tempting, clashes with scientific logic. But the truth is that more than 80% of the world's oceans have yet to be explored in detail. We know more about the surface of the moon than the ocean floor. The South Pacific in particular is an ideal setting for such enigmas. Its deep waters, cold currents, and geographic isolation make it a practically untouched place. In that region, near the coordinates where the bloop was detected, there are not many human installations or commercial routes. Scientific expeditions are rare. It is, so to speak, one of the most silent and forgotten corners of the planet. For that very reason, any phenomenon that occurs there acquires a ghostly aura, as if it came from another world. There were even those who linked the point of origin of the bloop with a more literary detail. The coordinates are not far from where H.P. Lovecraft located the sunken city of Aurelia in his story, The Call of Cthulhu. A purely geographic coincidence, yes, but one that did not go unnoticed by lovers of cosmic horror. That idea of a sleeping creature in the depths, whose whispers echoed to the surface, found in the bloop a perfect metaphor. Over time, the sound has been reanalyzed dozens of times. It has been compared with other seismic recordings, with animal signals, with underwater vibrations caused by volcanic activity. But no match is complete. No hypothesis fits entirely. The bloop remains an anomaly, an echo without an owner, a roar without a mouth. There are no remains, no images, no direct correlations. Only an audio file, recorded more than 2 decades ago, that continues to send shivers down the spines of those who listen to it. This phenomenon also opened a broader discussion about the nature of the ocean as an unknown territory. For centuries, we have placed our fears and legends in the sea. From mermaids to the Kraken, from lost cities to doors to other worlds. The bloop, unintentionally, fed that imagination. It gave a proof, a tangible trace, to what we had always believed intangible. And although the rational approach links it to a glacial explanation, the truth is that its symbolic weight and its inexplicable character still outweigh any logical argument. In a world where information multiplies by the second and where cameras record everything, there is something unsettling about the ocean still keeping secrets like this. Sounds that no one can explain, echoes that seem born of another era, from another natural order. The bloop is a reminder, a small, colossal hum that tells us that no matter how far we advance, no matter how much technology we develop, there are still corners of the planet that we cannot understand. And maybe, just maybe, it is better that way. The Hadal Zone, the most unexplored abyss on the planet. Beneath the ocean, beyond light and warmth, far below the point where pressure would effortlessly crush any unprepared human machine, there exists a dark, silent, and nearly untouched realm, the Hadal Zone. Its name comes from Hades, the underworld of Greek mythology, and it is not a poetic exaggeration. Because down there, starting at 6,000 meters deep and descending to more than 11,000, the world changes completely. It is a territory submerged in permanent shadow, where life has found ways to survive that defy logic, and where, despite technological advances, humans have barely managed to peak. Hadal zones are formed by deep and narrow ocean trenches, tectonic faults opened like wounds at the bottom of the sea. These trenches, such as the Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, or the Kermadec Trench, cut through the Earth's crust like blades, reaching depths that rival the height of the world's tallest mountains. And although they represent a considerable part of the ocean floor, they are the least explored places on the planet. In fact, we know more about the surface of Mars than about these abysses beneath our feet. The reason is not simple cowardice or lack of interest. The real difficulty lies in the environment. The pressure at those depths is so intense it would crush a conventional submarine as if it were made of paper. The temperature is near freezing. The darkness is absolute. There is no sunlight, no warm currents, no rest for materials. Every expedition represents a huge risk, not only due to technical challenges, but also due to the unpredictability of what might be found. What is clear is that down there, the rules are different. One of the most baffling discoveries is the very existence of life at those levels. For a long time, it was believed that no form of organism could survive in such an extreme environment. But the first probes and cameras that descended revealed the opposite. There was life. Small, translucent creatures, some resembling worms, others like colorless jellyfish, moved slowly in the abyssal mud. Even more surprising was the discovery of amphipods, crustaceans that adapted to pressure hundreds of times greater than what we feel at sea level. Some of these animals feed on remains that fall from higher zones, forming a food chain based on patience, resistance, and darkness. The unsettling part is not that life managed to establish itself there. The truly fascinating thing is how it has done so. In the Hadal Zone, there are no day-night cycles, no seasons, no light for photosynthesis. The creatures that live there depend on chemical processes, like chemosynthesis, or on so-called marine snow, microscopic fragments of organic matter that fall slowly from the surface. A journey of thousands of meters to the bottom, a constant rain of death that feeds life. In that system, time moves to a different rhythm. Hadal life forms present characteristics that seem taken from another dimension. Some fish, like the Hadal snailfish, have gelatinous bodies, adapted to extreme pressure, without hard skeletons, without swim bladders. Their organs have evolved to resist being crushed, and their eyes, in many cases, have disappeared. In their place, they develop sensors capable of perceiving vibrations, electric fields, or slight changes in water temperature. They do not need to see. They need to feel. They need to survive. But despite these findings, the truth is that exploration remains minimal. It is estimated that there are more than 30 Hadal trenches in the world, and only a handful have been investigated in any detail. In many of them, no manned vehicle has ever descended. Others have been explored only with probes or autonomous robots that transmit data for a short period before shutting down. Every meter gained toward the bottom is a costly victory, and every discovery raises more questions than it answers. In the year 2012, film director James Cameron descended alone to the deepest known point on the planet, the Challenger Deep, in the Mariana Trench. Aboard a specially designed submersible, he spent several hours in complete isolation, surrounded by impenetrable blackness. The silence was total. What he found there was not a desolate landscape, but an unknown ecosystem. He saw no monsters, heard no roars, but neither did he find dead terrain. Instead, he discovered traces of biological activity, footprints in the mud, microscopic organisms living in sediments that had not been disturbed for millions of years. However, even on that historic journey, there were limits. The cameras did not capture everything. Contact with the surface was intermittent, and time was limited. Those few data, although valuable, are not enough to understand the whole picture. It is like looking at a cathedral through a crack. We know there is more, but we cannot touch it. The Hadal Zone does not only pose biological or technological challenges, it also evokes a sense of existential vertigo. It is a reminder of how little we understand about our own planet. While we invest millions in looking toward the cosmos, we continue to ignore an entire world beneath us, alive, in motion, and full of secrets. What else could that abyss be hiding? What forms of life, what mechanisms, what unknown structures lie in those silent corners? Strange acoustic patterns have been detected in some trenches, vibrations that do not match earthquakes or underwater volcanic activity. Some probes have been damaged or disappeared without explanation in the depths. And although the most likely cause of these incidents is technical or natural, there are those who believe something else could be happening down there. Not out of superstition, but for the simple reason that we still do not know enough to rule it out. In an experiment carried out a few years ago, a camera dropped a piece of tuna to observe what would eat it in the Kermadec Trench. What it captured was a disturbing scene. Within minutes, the fish was devoured by a mass of large amphipods in a sudden frenzy. The reaction speed of these creatures, in an environment with almost no stimuli, suggests perception and organizational mechanisms far more complex than previously thought. It is not simple survival, it is strategy. All of this reinforces an increasingly accepted idea. The Hadal Zone is not a lifeless wasteland, but a dynamic ecosystem, with its own rules, with a parallel evolution that could contain essential clues about the very origin of life. Some scientists believe that, in such extreme conditions, microorganisms could be found that might also survive on other planets or moons in the solar system. What we discover in these abysses could help us understand what forms of life could inhabit worlds such as Europa, Jupiter's moon, or Enceladus, Saturn's icy moon. But in the meantime, it remains our mystery. An unreachable world, unfolding in silence beneath our oceans, waiting to be understood. The Hadal Zone does not scream, does not reveal itself, does not impose. It is there, still, deep, patient, watching from the shadows. And we, barely at the edge of the water, continue trying to understand what lives and breathes in that nameless abyss. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. In June of the year 2011, a Swedish exploration vessel sailed through the cold and calm waters of the Baltic Sea. The Ocean X team, an organization dedicated to the search for shipwrecks and submerged remains, expected to find something ordinary. Perhaps an old bottle, some metal object corroded by salt, or even the remains of a vessel forgotten by time. However, what the ship's sonar sensors captured during that routine expedition was something completely different, something that did not match anything they had ever seen before. On the seafloor, at about 90 meters of depth, the silhouette of an impossible structure appeared. Circular, enormous, perfectly defined, a geometric figure that seemed artificial. From that moment, what became known as the Baltic Sea Anomaly was born. The shape that appeared in the sonar images resembled a saucer, a stone or metal disc with regular edges and marked lines, as if it had been carved or molded with clear intention. It is approximately 60 meters in diameter, with a height of almost 4 meters, and it rises from the seabed as if it had landed there. But that was not all. From one side of the object, a kind of ramp seems to extend, a long structure that connects to the bottom as if it had left a trail along its path. It is as if something had landed, or even more unsettling, had crashed and dragged. The members of the expedition were baffled. It was not the typical fragment of a sunken ship. The sonar image had a peculiar sharpness. It was not a rock, nor a sandbank, nor a container. And when they passed over the place again, the figure was still there, unaltered, as if guarding the sea floor since unmeasurable times. The news soon reached the media, first in Sweden, then throughout Europe, and finally to the rest of the world. Speculations exploded. Some said it was an extraterrestrial craft. Others spoke of an ancient structure built by a lost civilization, and there were also those who thought it was simply a curiously shaped rock. But what everyone shared was the same feeling. It did not seem natural. The controversy grew when more detailed images began to spread, taken by underwater cameras that descended to the object. What those shots revealed was even stranger. The surface of the object had right angles, flat areas with textures that did not match common rock formations. Circular patterns were even detected engraved in some parts, like marks or signs. Additionally, divers who approached reported that when near the anomaly, electronic equipment failed, cameras shut down for no apparent reason, and communications became unstable. That technical interference gave rise to more radical theories, fueling the idea that they were facing something beyond conventional understanding. Geologists began to weigh in. Some, like Professor Volker Bruchert, suggested that it could be a natural geological formation, the result of glacial processes from the last ice age. They explained that glaciers might have dragged and shaped rocks into peculiar forms during their advance and subsequent retreat. This hypothesis sounded logical on paper, but it left many loose ends. How do you explain the symmetry of the structure? What causes the electromagnetic interferences in the area? Why are there no other similar formations throughout the Baltic? Over time, new attempts at exploration were made, although with limited resources. The depth and conditions of the Baltic Sea complicated the descent of heavy machinery or more advanced equipment. In addition, the interest of the scientific community seemed to cool. Some voices accused Ocean X of exaggerating the facts to obtain funding. But the truth is that, beyond theories and disputes, the object remains there. Intact. Mysterious. It has not been removed, nor excavated, nor thoroughly studied. It has only been observed, like a scar on the seabed that refuses to reveal its origin. One of the most discussed theories in alternative forums suggests that the anomaly could be part of an ancient megalithic structure, something like a submerged Stonehenge, belonging to a civilization that lived when those lands were not covered by the sea. There are records that the water level has risen dramatically in the last 10,000 years, and it would not be impossible to imagine that areas now submerged were once habitable land. In that context, the idea of a structure built by archaic humans begins to take shape. Although it remains difficult to explain how they managed to carve or assemble a figure of that scale with primitive tools. On the other hand, there are defenders of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, who believe that the shape and the electromagnetic effects of the object are proof of a non-human origin. They point out that its silhouette looks too much like that of a flying saucer, and that the track on the side seems like the trace of a crash landing. This version has been constantly fed by the lack of conclusive explanations and by the silence of many scientific institutions that, according to some, have avoided becoming involved in the case. Although this idea may seem extravagant, it cannot be denied that the anomaly has features that invite one to imagine the impossible. One variable that is almost never mentioned is the material of the object. Some analyzed fragments contained minerals such as limonite and goethite, which led more than one researcher to think that the object had been subjected to high temperatures. This, once again, clashes with the traditional geological hypothesis, because such formations should not have traces of extreme heat if they were simply dragged by a glacier. Are we perhaps talking about a structure that was melted, burned, or fell from the sky in flames? No one can say for sure, but the data is there, waiting for a more solid interpretation. The Baltic Sea Anomaly has been described as a mirror of our doubts. It reflects all that we do not know about the ocean floor, all that we have not explored, all that science still cannot classify. It is a blind spot on the map, a question suspended beneath the water. And the most curious thing of all is that it has remained immobile for centuries, perhaps millennia, waiting for someone to dare to look more closely. The sea often hides its secrets with skill. What is buried on the bottom rarely rises to the surface. But when something emerges, even if it is just a sonar image, and shows us something so out of place, so disconcerting, it forces us to look at the ocean with different eyes. It is no longer just a place of beauty or danger, but a territory where the past, the unknown, and the inexplicable coexist in silence. And in that silence, the Baltic Sea Anomaly remains, like a guardian from another time, waiting for someone to listen to what it has to say. The lights from the depths, inexplicable bioluminescence. In the depths of the ocean, where sunlight vanishes completely, and an absolute darkness reigns that seems to swallow time itself, something glows. It is not a fleeting flash like the reflection of a flashlight, nor an artificial spark from human machinery, but a living light, self-generated, produced by organisms that, in the total isolation of the abyssal zones, have learned to shine in the dark. It is called bioluminescence, and although its existence is no longer a novelty to science, there are aspects of this phenomenon that still challenge the most basic logic. Because there are lights that do not behave as they should, there are gleams that appear where nothing exists, and there are records of flares that do not match any known creature. In theory, bioluminescence is the result of a chemical reaction that occurs within the bodies of certain organisms, such as jellyfish, fish, plankton, and some types of bacteria. This reaction releases energy in the form of visible light and serves very specific purposes: attracting prey, confusing predators, communicating with other individuals, or simply acting as camouflage in a world where anything that glows may mean the difference between living or vanishing. In many cases, the patterns are understandable. There are fish with special organs beneath their eyes that emit short signals to mark territory, or squids that release clouds of light to escape as if using smoke bombs. Everything seems to fit into a logic of survival, evolutionary adaptations shaped by millions of years in the shadows. But not everything fits so easily into what is expected. For decades, scientists and sailors have reported luminous appearances in the depths that cannot be attributed to any known organism. In some areas of the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific, during scientific expeditions or commercial voyages, flashes have been observed that cover vast areas of the sea, forming patterns that spread for several minutes before disappearing. They are not produced by a group of organisms floating together. They are not planktonic bioluminescence. They are masses of light that seem to emerge from below, as if something large, something deep, were lighting the water from the bottom. One of the strangest manifestations is the so-called Milky Sea, an extremely rare phenomenon, yet recorded on multiple occasions by satellites and ships. In this event, areas of up to 100 kilometers of ocean shine with a whitish glow, intense enough that one could read a book on deck without the need for a flashlight. Images taken from space show entire regions of ocean transformed into luminous blankets, with well-defined edges and a texture that resembles a sheet of fog lit from within. Despite efforts to explain it as a massive accumulation of luminous bacteria, the exact source of this illumination remains uncertain. No known bacteria are capable of coordinating on such a scale, nor is it clear why this behavior only occurs at specific times, without a constant pattern. And there is more. In the China Sea, automated submarines have recorded signals of light in areas where pressure and the lack of nutrients make complex life unviable. These are brief impulses that emit no heat and recur at irregular intervals. They resemble signals. Some have tried to explain them as reflections of fluorescent minerals on the walls of the abyss, but those rocks lack the necessary properties. Others suggest they could be emissions from uncatalogued organisms, perhaps beings adapted to conditions even more extreme than we know. And although there is no conclusive proof, there are also no solid reasons to dismiss it. In the North Atlantic, experienced divers have recounted encounters difficult to classify. During nighttime descents into deep waters, they have seen lights spiraling, as if something were dancing around them. Sometimes they surround them, sometimes they move away silently. Once, off the coast of Ireland, a group of researchers witnessed a green glow emerging from a crack in the seabed. It was not a diffuse light, but a steady band, as if behind the rock there were an active energy source. As they approached, everything went dark instantly, as if it had sensed the human presence. They tried to record it, but the equipment failed. When they returned to the same spot days later, there was no trace of the phenomenon. These experiences, combined with disconcerting scientific data, have led some to theorize about the existence of a completely different kind of bioluminescence from the one we know. A bioluminescence of scale, of extreme depth, generated by organisms or structures that we have not yet observed directly. It is possible that species exist that emit light in a very different way, not as a chemical reaction, but as part of a more complex biological system, linked to neural networks, interspecies communication, or even to unknown functions that have no equivalent on the surface. When we talk about such an alien environment as the ocean floor, the possibilities increase exponentially. In some coastal cultures of the Pacific, there are ancestral tales about lights that emerge from the sea. In the oral tradition of some Philippine or Polynesian islands, it is said that there are sacred places in the ocean where the water glows supernaturally, and that this light is a sign of a presence that protects or sometimes punishes. Though it may seem mythological, Some researchers have begun to view these tales as early records of real phenomena that we still do not understand. When a story is repeated over centuries among peoples who never had contact with each other, perhaps it is time to see it with new eyes. In the laboratory, attempts have been made to recreate conditions of extreme pressure and darkness to study the behavior of bioluminescent organisms, but the results are limited. Many of them do not survive the change of environment. Others lose their ability to emit light when removed. It is as if bioluminescence is intimately linked to its context, to that deep sea that gives it meaning. There are even species that have never been seen alive outside of water and are only known by fragments. Sometimes, when examining samples collected by underwater drones, scientists find traces of light that persist in tissues that should already be dead, an energy that refuses to go out. Not everything that glows in the sea has an explanation. In recent decades, research into bioluminescence has opened a fascinating door to forms of life that operate under different codes. But they have also made clear that there is a limit to our understanding. That beneath the surface, in those invisible corridors where everything is silence and pressure, life has continued to evolve in unpredictable ways. The lights that appear and disappear in the depths do not always behave like creatures. Sometimes they behave like ideas, like impulses, like signals from something we have not yet deciphered. And while we continue trying to understand them, those lights remain down there. They keep lighting up in the absolute blackness, shining for no one, perhaps communicating with each other, or perhaps waiting. We may never know exactly what generates them. Or perhaps at some point, we will discover that this light is not just a biological response, but a form of language, a form of presence, a way to tell us, without words, that there is still much left to discover in the dark heart of the ocean. The Remains of Atlantis, myth or real underwater civilization. For centuries, the story of Atlantis has existed on the border between myth and possibility. There is no other lost civilization that has inspired so many theories, hypotheses, and failed expeditions. Its name is deeply engraved in the collective imagination as the symbol of an advanced, powerful, and majestic city that was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. That phrase, as poetic as it is tragic, did not come from nowhere. It has a clear source: the Greek philosopher Plato, who wrote about it more than 2,000 years ago, describing it as a naval empire, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. There, as he narrated in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, existed a civilization with an astonishing level of political, technical, and cultural development, which disappeared suddenly, leaving behind a silence full of suspicion. The idea of a lost city beneath the sea would not have survived so long if it did not contain something that goes beyond the legendary. Because the fascinating thing about Atlantis is not just the story that surrounds it, but the effect it has had on generations of researchers, explorers, and dreamers who have thrown themselves into the ocean with the hope of finding its ruins. In every corner of the planet where the sea has devoured land, someone has suggested that it might have been there. And it is precisely that ambiguity, that elusive nature, which keeps alive the possibility that, in some forgotten place, the remains of an ancient civilization are still waiting to be rediscovered. Throughout the 20th century and into the present, multiple supposed locations for Atlantis have emerged. Some of the most persistent theories point to the Azores, a volcanic group in the middle of the Atlantic that, geologically speaking, could have hosted a larger continental mass in the past. In that area, underwater anomalies have been detected. Terrain elevations, remains of structures, and formations that certain researchers have interpreted as stairways, walls, or platforms. However, official studies have attributed these shapes to natural phenomena, such as the erosion of solidified lava. Even so, doubt persists, because many of those formations have a degree of symmetry that unsettles even the most skeptical geologists. Another hotspot in this search lies off the coast of Cuba. In the year 2001, a team of Canadian researchers working with high-resolution sonar technology detected a series of geometric structures submerged more than 600 meters deep. The images showed what appeared to be an entire city. Large rectangular blocks, straight alignments, shapes that evoked plazas, avenues, and temples. Although there was an initial attempt to investigate the area, technical difficulties and lack of government support halted the project. To this day, that discovery has not been thoroughly analyzed again. But for many, it remains one of the strongest pieces of evidence that something very ancient and very large lies at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea. There is another, even more peculiar case in the Gulf of Cadiz, where scientists have found circular formations under the seabed that suspiciously match Plato's description of the design of Atlantis. A city built in concentric rings, surrounded by water channels and defenses. In that area, significant seismic movements have also been recorded, leading to the belief that at some point in the remote past, a geological collapse may have dragged constructions to the seafloor. Some believe these formations could be remnants of Tartessos, an ancient Iberian civilization that disappeared without leaving many traces. Others, bolder still, argue that this was the true location of Atlantis. What is most intriguing is that many of these areas, identified by different research teams around the planet, have something in common: an average depth that suggests they were not always submerged. That is to say, it is possible that these regions were dry land during an earlier stage of the planet, before sea levels rose due to the melting of glaciers after the last great glaciation, about 12,000 years ago. In that scenario, entire civilizations could have developed near the coasts, taking advantage of access to water, trade, and marine resources. And if any of them disappeared abruptly, due to a catastrophic event such as an earthquake, volcanic eruption, or massive tsunami, then their traces would be buried beneath the ocean, exactly as the story of Atlantis tells. But there is more. In areas of the South Atlantic near Brazil, similar discoveries have been reported. Submerged structures that appear artificial, aligned in rectangular patterns, too regular to be attributed to geological chance. In these places, the stone shows signs of cutting, polishing, and wear that some researchers have classified as traces of tools. The analyses, however, usually remain inconclusive. Funding is lacking, permits are lacking, and many times expeditions are cancelled prematurely. It is as if the ocean has a way of protecting its oldest secrets, placing obstacles whenever someone gets too close. One of the questions that divides researchers is whether Atlantis, as described by Plato, really existed, or if it is a fable with political and philosophical morals. Some argue that the philosopher used that story to illustrate the decline of powerful societies that lose their moral compass. Others believe he based it on ancient Egyptian accounts, passed down through generations and distorted by time. But even if we accepted that the original story was exaggerated or symbolic, that does not negate the possibility that there was an advanced prehistoric civilization, whose memory remained preserved in fragments of myths and ancient traditions. Human history is full of gaps. For a long time, it was believed that there were no urban civilizations before Mesopotamia, until Göbekli Tepe was discovered, a monumental complex in Turkey that dates back more than 10,000 years, completely outside accepted timelines. That discovery forced entire chapters of prehistory to be rewritten. What if there are more sites like that, but under the sea? What if Atlantis was one of them? In recent years, with the improvement of sonar scanning systems, underwater mapping, and exploration robotics, a new door has opened to study these possible submerged remains. However, a firm decision is still lacking to approach them with the seriousness they deserve. The myth has done as much harm as good. It has inspired, but it has also caused many to dismiss these subjects as fantasies. And yet, the images, the maps, the stories remain. Fragments of a history that perhaps we have not yet been able to read in full. Whatever it is, wherever it may be, the Trail of Atlantis continues to fuel the idea that beneath the sea are hidden not only strange creatures and unknown landscapes, but also entire pages of human history that we have not yet been able to recover. It is not about searching for a golden city or shining temples, but about tracing the footsteps of a past that may have been more complex, more ancient, and more mysterious than we dare to imagine. The Mariana Trench echoes from hell. There is a place on the planet where the depth reaches such magnitude that everything we know about the sea seems insufficient. A silent, dense abyss, where the water exerts such violent pressure that any unprepared structure would collapse in seconds, as if nature wanted to make it clear that we are not welcome down there. That place exists, and it is located in the western Pacific Ocean, near the Mariana Islands, known as the Mariana Trench, and within it, its most extreme point, the Challenger Deep, an unfathomable pit that descends almost 11,000 meters below sea level. A place so remote, so alien, that even today, in the digital age, we still do not fully understand what happens down there. What makes this place so disturbing is not just its physical depth, but the symbolic echo it awakens. It is the deepest point on the planet, the end of the map, a portal to the unknown where silence does not mean calm, but threat. And that silence is not always absolute. Sometimes from the bowels of that trench emerge sounds that should not be there. Vibrations captured by acoustic monitoring equipment, recordings that have left scientists and technicians perplexed, echoes that resonate at frequencies that do not belong to earthquakes or landslides or human machinery, sounds that seem to throb with an intention we cannot identify. One of the strangest of these recordings was captured by NOAA, the agency responsible for studying the oceans. The sound was so complex and so unfamiliar to what they were used to that they named it upsweep, a kind of ascending lament, regular, repetitive, that seemed to come precisely from that area. The most disconcerting part was its persistence. It appeared every year, in the same seasons, and then disappeared, as if something lived there, as if it returned on a defined cycle. The recordings, amplified to be audible to the human ear, are chilling. They are not mechanical, they are not static. They have a pulse. But that was only the beginning. Over time, different expeditions have tried to descend to the bottom of the Mariana Trench with varying degrees of success. In the early 1960s, a bathyscaphe manned by Jacques Picard and Don Walsh managed to reach the bottom for barely 20 minutes. What they saw was scarce: mud, total darkness, some scattered creature moving slowly, and nothing else. But the most disturbing record was not visual, but sensory. Picard wrote in his journal that, while descending, he felt the sea watching them. A vague phrase, difficult to explain in scientific terms, but one that captures the essence of what it means to be surrounded by more than 10 kilometers of water in complete darkness, in a space where life could have followed a course parallel to that of the surface. Decades later, when James Cameron descended alone to that same depth, high-definition cameras managed to capture clearer images. What they showed was a desolate landscape, like an underwater desert, with no apparent signs of activity. However, when reviewing the ambient audio of the expedition, fragments of sounds were found that did not correspond to the submersible's movements or to the mechanics of its engines. They were low rhythmic tones that were lost among the natural vibrations of the water. And although the official explanation was the creaking of tectonic plates or the resonance of the hull under pressure, other experts were not entirely convinced. What has made the Mariana Trench so attractive and terrifying is that mixture of emptiness and possibility. At that depth, the pressure is more than 1,000 times greater than what is felt on the surface. There, water behaves differently. Even sound propagates under different rules. Light, of course, does not reach. But life, strangely, does. Translucent organisms, creatures resembling flattened jellyfish, blind worms, and small crustaceans adapted to the abyss move among the sediments, as if they owned the place. They feed on remains that fall from the upper layers of the ocean, on particles that take weeks to reach the bottom. Every living being that exists, there is an exception, a proof that evolution never gives up. And yet, there is something in that environment that goes beyond biology. Some theories suggest that beneath the trench's floor there could be even deeper geological cavities, small natural chambers where gases, minerals, or even unrecorded forms of energy accumulate. That possibility has led to speculation about unusual seismic or volcanic activity, perhaps even internal heat sources that could give rise to life not based on the rules we know. These are ideas that border the edges of what science allows today, but they have not been completely discarded, because the truth is that the Mariana Trench has been scarcely explored. And when we say scarcely, it is literal. Less than 1% has been accurately mapped. Among the lesser-known records are reports from probes that, while descending, have detected abrupt temperature changes. Zones where, for no apparent reason, the water warms for a few seconds and then cools again. Small magnetic alterations have also been reported, which has led to speculation about metallic deposits or even unidentified geological activity. Some believe there could be natural structures, such as volcanic tubes or active cracks, that channel energy from the deep layers of the planet. Others, more daring, believe that what is found there is not entirely natural. And this is where the field of speculative theories comes in. Since ancient times, abysses have been seen as gates, not places. Gates to other worlds, to other dimensions, or to hidden civilizations. The idea that in the deepest part of the ocean there may be intelligent presence, though invisible due to our limited exploration capacity, has been fueled by hundreds of stories from sailors, divers, strange recordings, and signals that no one can decipher. Are there creatures that have evolved completely separate from us, adapted to live in perpetual darkness? Is there something that hides deliberately, staying away from our technology, remaining silent when we observe and speaking when we turn away? There are no definitive answers. What does exist is a pit almost 11 kilometers deep that continues to emit signals, sounds, and vibrations. A place that has been visited fewer times than the moon. A point on the map that, despite appearing in books and encyclopedias, remains a living enigma. The Mariana Trench is not just a geological depression. It is a dark mirror reflecting the limits of our understanding. A reminder that the planet we live on still holds secrets as deep as they are ancient. And while satellites orbit the Earth and robots explore Mars, that abyss remains there, motionless, latent, roaring in frequencies we do not understand, as if it breathes slowly. Perhaps because it knows something we do not yet. Or perhaps because it never stopped looking upward, waiting for someone, someday, to truly decide to descend. The Yonaguni Civilization, pyramids underwater. Off the southern coast of Japan, at the far western end of the Ryukyu archipelago, lies a small island called Yonaguni. It is a quiet, almost forgotten place, where days seem to pass with a slowness unlike the rest of the world. But beneath its waters, hidden by the current and marine silence, rests one of the most puzzling discoveries of the 20th century. There, about 25 meters deep, lies a massive stone structure that appears to have been carved with a precision that defies the passage of time and geological logic. Some call it the Yonaguni Monument. Others, more daring, consider it the lost testimony of a submerged civilization that could completely change the history of humanity. It was in 1986 when a diver named Kihachiro Aratake, exploring the area in search of new sites for sport diving, came across rock formations that did not seem natural. They were huge stepped blocks with straight lines, perfect angles, and smooth surfaces. As he descended, the image became clearer. Overlapping platforms, walls with 90-degree corners, passageways opening between gigantic slabs and steps descending into the depths, as if leading to an underground plaza. Aratake, shocked, returned to the surface with the feeling that he had found something that should not be there. Something built, not shaped by chance. The news quickly reached the ears of scientists and archaeologists. The first to study the site seriously was Professor Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of Ryukyu. After multiple dives and years of analysis, Kimura concluded that he was not facing a natural formation, but rather a man-made construction, possibly over 10,000 years old. According to him, what is seen today in Yonaguni is only the visible part of a much larger complex, with tunnels, paths, and associated structures still covered by the seabed. In his interpretation, it could have been a temple, a sacred city, or even the capital of a lost civilization swallowed by the ocean after a devastating earthquake. The images showing this monument are striking. The main structure has the shape of a stepped pyramid, with a rectangular base measuring more than 150 meters long and 40 meters high. The blocks seem to fit together with a regularity difficult to attribute to chance. There are vertical cuts, symmetrical channels, and platforms that seem to have been designed for human transit. Some stones even show what appear to be carved symbols, like marks or inscriptions, although the passage of time has erased almost all precise traces. Divers who have explored the site speak of a difficult-to-describe sensation, like walking through a collapsed temple at the bottom of the sea, as if time had stopped just before the collapse. But not everyone agrees with that interpretation. Many geologists have insisted that the formations of Yonaguni could be the result of natural processes. The predominant type of rock in the area, a sandstone that easily fractures, tends to break into geometric shapes under certain conditions of pressure, temperature, and seismic movement. According to this view, what looks like a pyramid is nothing more than a geological coincidence, magnified by our need to find patterns. However, this explanation loses strength when observing certain features too precise to have been shaped by chance. Staircases with steps of the same size, corners so defined they seem cut with tools, blocks that maintain exact proportions among themselves. All of this has kept the debate alive, without a definitive resolution. One of the most suggestive theories links Yonaguni to a prehistoric civilization that may have inhabited southern Asia at the end of the last ice age, a time when sea levels were much lower. In that context, many of today's islands were connected by land, and areas now submerged were fertile valleys and habitable coastlines. If a developed culture existed in that region, it could have built structures that were buried under the sea when the glaciers began to melt, and the water level rose by more than 100 meters in just a few centuries. That catastrophic change would have erased almost all trace, leaving only these silent marks for those who dare to descend. Parallels with other ancient cultures have not been long in appearing. Some researchers have compared the Yonaguni structure with the stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica, with the terraces of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, or even with the megalithic temples of Malta. These comparisons do not seek to establish a direct relationship, but rather to highlight a common pattern: humanity's tendency, since remote times, to build with gigantic blocks and precise geometry, as if the use of stone had a function beyond the practical, as if it carried symbolic meaning. Could Yonaguni be part of that forgotten lineage? Some have taken the speculation even further, suggesting that this underwater structure could be the trace of early contact between civilizations separated by oceans. Although official archaeology rejects this possibility due to lack of concrete evidence, it is undeniable that some cultural coincidences around the world still lack a clear explanation. And in the case of Yonaguni, the simple fact that it is submerged makes any investigation expensive, slow, and technically complex, which has greatly limited the possibility of deeper analysis. Many universities and research centers have preferred to stay on the sidelines, leaving the case halfway between formal science and alternative research. Even so, there is something undeniable. What lies beneath the waters of Yonaguni does not resemble any other known underwater geological formation. And those who have had the opportunity to dive there agree on one thing. The place conveys something, a presence, a feeling of frozen history, of architecture fallen into oblivion. The stone seems to have witnessed something, as if each carved line preserved the echo of ancient footsteps, of hands that worked, of voices that faded away millennia ago. Perhaps we will never know for certain who was responsible, if anyone was. Maybe the answer remains beyond our reach, lost at the bottom of the sea along with other secrets we have yet to imagine. But the truth is that the Yonaguni structure remains there, motionless, gigantic, unalterable, like a message without a recipient, a submerged letter written in stone that resists the passage of time. And while the ocean continues to cradle it in silence, people keep trying to decipher its meaning, diving not only into the depths of the sea, but also into the voids of our own history, the black spheres of the Pacific. Across the vast and enigmatic floor of the Pacific Ocean, among deep crevices, submerged volcanic fields, and sedimentary plains untouched by light for millions of years, some objects have been found that baffle those who study them. They are seemingly simple structures, but due to their context, their perfect shape, and their persistent mystery, they have raised more questions than answers. They are spheres, black spheres. Some are the size of a tennis ball, others reach larger dimensions, but they all share a disturbing characteristic: their almost perfect shape, their dark and intense color, and their apparent resistance to the natural processes of the seabed. These objects began to be seriously documented in the mid-20th century, although earlier reports had already mentioned spherical structures recovered during scientific dredging in deep areas of the Central Pacific. The first hypotheses pointed to manganese concretions, mineral formations that are generated on the seafloor through extremely slow processes, layer by layer, until they form hard and dark nodules. And while many of these spheres can indeed be classified as manganese nodules, there are others that resist such a simple explanation, because not all of them have a natural composition. Some contain metallic alloys that should not be found in that part of the ocean, and others seem completely unrelated to the chemistry of the environment in which they were found. In the 1970s, during a series of explorations led by the United States in areas of the Western Pacific, several of these spherical bodies were recovered, drawing special interest in laboratories. Inside, traces of elements were found that usually only appear as a result of high temperature and high pressure processes, such as titanium, zirconium, and traces of radioactive materials. They were not dangerous amounts, but enough to attract attention. What was unsettling was not only their composition, but also their internal structure. When sectioned, some of these spheres revealed a geometry that seemed designed, with ordered layers of different materials, as if they had been constructed, not formed by chance. One of the theories that has generated the most noise is that these spheres could be capsules, some kind of container or device designed to withstand the most extreme oceanic conditions. Some have suggested that they are ancient technology, possibly forgotten artifacts from nuclear experiments, scientific capsules launched into the sea and lost decades ago, or even parts of probes designed to study the deep ocean and later abandoned without clear records. However, several of these spheres have been found in places where there was never known human activity, no navigation routes, no underwater bases. And some have been so embedded in the seabed that their age could go back tens of thousands of years. That line of thought has led others to explore riskier hypotheses. It has been proposed that these spheres could be artifacts of a technology not yet understood, perhaps linked to ancient civilizations that developed knowledge we have now forgotten, or even to visitors from beyond the planet. Speculations that many reject for lack of solid evidence, but that remain valid because science, so far, has not provided a definitive answer. In fact, every time a new sphere with unusual characteristics is recovered, explanations are suspended again. What once seemed closed is opened again. On the coasts of Micronesia, near a chain of underwater mountains, Several spheres were found with a pattern that seemed engraved on their surface. They were not recognizable symbols or writings, but rather curved lines in low relief that ran along the body of the spheres like a circuit. These marks were partially eroded, but too regular to be natural fractures. The samples were sent to several analysis centers, where it was determined that the pattern was superficial and did not affect the internal structure of the object. Decoration? Code? Result of a process we still do not understand? Over time, experiments have been conducted to replicate these spheres in laboratories, using mineral deposition techniques under controlled conditions. But the results are far from what is found on the ocean floor. No replica has achieved the same degree of sphericity or the same internal composition without direct intervention. That leads to an inevitable question, even if scientists avoid stating it openly. Did someone else, at some point in the past, place these spheres there? Or worse still, did someone send them with a purpose we have not yet discovered? Some oceanographers argue that it is still possible that all the spheres result from natural processes. The depths of the sea are unique environments, where pressure, temperature, and chemical composition create phenomena that are still not well understood. But even they acknowledge that there is a small percentage of these structures that continues to defy all classifications. Those spheres, the ones that seem to be made with mathematical precision, the ones that contain strange elements or organized layers, remain in a kind of limbo between the explainable and the improbable. A striking detail is that many of the black spheres have been found at great depths, often in volcanic zones or near oceanic ridges. This has led to the consideration that they might be residues expelled from within the Earth during underwater eruptions, molten balls that cooled as they descended. However, this theory does not explain the spheres with complex internal structures or those containing synthetic materials. Because if something seems manufactured, and there is no explanation as to how it could have formed spontaneously in that context, science enters an uncomfortable terrain, one it does not like to frequent. And in the middle of this debate, the objects remain. Real, hard, silent. Small spheres that seem to contain a story much bigger than their size. Some are kept in university laboratories, others in private collections, and many more remain at the bottom of the sea, hidden among the silt and darkness, waiting for someone to notice them. They are fragments of a puzzle for which we still do not have the full picture. Scattered pieces of a story that perhaps has neither beginning nor end, only a disturbing presence in a forgotten corner of the ocean. The black spheres of the Pacific do not shine, do not move, do not emit sounds. And yet, they intrigue like few things in the underwater world. Because they are witnesses of something, messengers of a time or an intention that escapes us. They are small, but they carry weight. Not in grams, but in mystery. The Modern Kraken. Encounters with giant squids. For centuries, sailors have told stories that no one on dry land wanted to believe. Tales of colossal monsters rising from the depths to attack ships, wrapping their hulls with tentacles like iron cables, and dragging them into the darkness without a trace. They called it Kraken, a word that echoes from another time, from a primal fear that still vibrates in the heart of the ocean. Many thought it was just a myth, an exaggeration born of fear and the open sea. But as time went on, some of those legends began to take real shape. And when science decided to seriously look into the depths, what it found was more unsettling than anyone expected. In the darkest zones of the ocean, where the pressure is so high that few devices can withstand it without deforming, live creatures that seem taken from a horror tale. One of them is the giant squid, a species that for centuries was considered almost a fantasy. It was credited with impossible sizes, epic battles against whales, and fleeting appearances among the foam. Its existence was hinted at by remains found in the stomachs of sperm whales or fragments that floated to the shore, like loose fingers of a hand we never fully saw. But complete proof was missing. Seeing them alive, in their territory was missing. And for a long time, no one managed to do it. That changed in the year 2006, when a team of Japanese scientists succeeded, for the first time in history, in capturing images of a giant squid in its natural habitat. The cameras descended hundreds of meters into the waters of the Pacific and briefly captured it. A slender, powerful creature with tentacles stretching more than 10 meters and eyes the size of deep soup plates. The animal moved with a sinister elegance, almost effortlessly, gliding like a shadow with a will. It did not need to do anything violent to unnerve everyone who saw the recording. Its mere presence was enough. That was only the beginning. Since then, more images have been obtained, though always fragmented, incomplete, as if the giant squid knew how to move out of reach. Stranded specimens have been found, dragged by storms or killed by unknown causes. Each time one appears, it opens a new window to what was, until recently, a blank abyss. Some have reached 13 meters in length, and it is speculated that there are even larger individuals that have never been fully seen. Its anatomy remains a puzzle. Sharp beaks hidden at the base of its arms, suction cups armed with hooks, moldable bodies capable of withstanding the pressure of more than 1,000 meters of depth. But the most puzzling thing about these encounters is that, despite their size and strength, these animals remain a mystery. It is not known how long they live, how they reproduce, or how many truly exist. Their biology seems designed for extreme survival. They have relatively large brains, advanced nervous systems, and an intelligence that has led many to compare them with octopuses, known for their ability to solve complex problems. The giant squid does not seem like a clumsy creature. It moves with intention. It acts with strategy. It is, in every sense, a predator that does not need to display its power to command respect. In the North Atlantic region, near the Azores and the coast of Newfoundland, sailors have reported for decades attacks or close encounters with creatures matching these squids' descriptions. Small boats that have been shaken without apparent cause, giant ink stains appearing on the surface like a warning signature, or tentacles briefly emerging before vanishing. Most of these accounts have not been verified, but there are patterns that repeat. Specific zones, certain seasons, similar behaviors. And that has led some oceanographers to wonder if these creatures are not only real, but more common than previously thought. In scientific literature, there is an even more enigmatic category, the colossal squid. Similar to the giant one, but with even more extreme proportions, this animal has been studied thanks to specimens found in Antarctica. Unlike the giant squid, it has a more robust body, shorter but thicker tentacles, and rotating hooks on its arms. One of the best preserved specimens measured about 14 meters, but scientists believe there are others much larger. The problem is that they live in inaccessible areas, where the water is almost liquid ice and visibility is non-existent. Reaching them requires technology that is only just beginning to develop. Some researchers have started to cross-reference data between whale migration patterns and the zones where giant squid remains have been reported. The result is disturbing. It seems that there is a kind of hidden frontier beneath the sea, an unmarked line on the maps where these marine titans frequently clash. There are scars on the bodies of sperm whales that can only be explained by violent encounters with enormous and armed animals. And that, in turn, confirms that the giant squid is not just an elusive animal, but an active hunter, capable of defending its territory with unexpected ferocity. Over the years, unofficial accounts have emerged from divers who claim to have seen tentacles moving in the shadows, larger than any recorded creature. There are even sonar recordings showing moving masses of abnormal dimensions, but that are never visually identified. The idea that there exists an even larger, quieter, older squid is not as absurd as it may seem. In an ocean where so much remains to be explored, the possibility that there are unclassified creatures is not a fantasy. It is almost a certainty. The Kraken, then, was not a baseless invention. It was an exaggerated interpretation, perhaps, but inspired by something the sea still hides. What makes the giant squid so fearsome is not only its size or strength, but its invisibility. Its ability to live beyond our sight, in a realm where few things survive, where oxygen is scarce and light never reaches. It inhabits the margins of knowledge, as a living warning that nature always keeps aces up its sleeve. And perhaps the most terrifying thing is that it does not seem to need us. It is there, existing in its own time, waiting, moving unseen. There is no way to know exactly how many there are, how large they can become, or what secrets lie hidden in their depths. But each finding, each image, each tentacle found drifting, is one more piece of the puzzle, a sign that the Kraken, although by another name, does exist. And it is still down there, gliding through the darkness, like a ghost with a body, like a memory of the ancestral fear we feel when we look at the sea and do not understand what lies beyond the waves. Unexplained Sounds, Julia, Upsweep, and others. In the depths of the ocean, where the oldest silence on the planet reigns, sometimes things happen that no one can explain. These are fleeting, intangible events that leave traces on recordings but escape the human eye. One would think that, under thousands of meters of water, in an environment where darkness is absolute and pressure reaches crushing levels, time would pass calmly, without shocks. But in those invisible layers of the sea, sometimes something resonates. A sound, an echo, a murmur that stretches for miles, vibrating powerfully through sensors and underwater microphones, leaving even those who have been listening to the ocean for years bewildered. These sounds have been recorded thanks to a network of hydrophones installed by NOAA, originally designed to detect submarines during the Cold War. After the fall of military tensions, the technology was used to monitor underwater seismic activity, cetacean migrations, and the ocean's overall acoustic conditions. It was then, when no one expected it, that strange recordings began to arrive. Sounds of unknown origin, some soft like a distant whisper, others so intense that they seemed like the roar of something gigantic and hidden. One of the first to attract attention was the so-called upsweep, first captured in 1991. This sound appears as a series of ascending frequency pulses, constant, regular, that seem to come from the Pacific. It appears every year during the spring and autumn and disappears without warning. No one knows for sure where it comes from. Estimates point to an area near the ocean ridge, a submerged mountain chain that divides the ocean in two. It has been suggested that it might be linked to volcanic or hydrothermal activity, but none of the explanations have been conclusive. What is puzzling is not just its frequency and repetition, but its duration. It has been active at different times for over 30 years. It is like a heartbeat, like an unanswered call. Another of the most enigmatic sounds was recorded in 1999 and was named Julia. Unlike others, this was a one-time event. It lasted only a few minutes, but its volume was so loud that it was picked up by multiple sensors located more than 5,000 kilometers apart. The amplified audio sounds like a kind of deep, grave lament, slowly unfolding like a muffled scream. NOAA suggested that it could be an iceberg scraping against the seafloor. But even that explanation doesn't convince everyone, not only because of its intensity, but because of the sound's shape. Julia sounds like something else, something that moves, that breathes, that inhabits a place where there shouldn't be anything. Then there's Slow Down, captured in 1997. This sound has a different quality. It starts with a high frequency that gradually decreases, as if something large were losing speed in the water. There is no known animal that emits such a pattern, and no geological phenomenon has been shown to generate such a sustained and descending sound. The area where it was detected is near Antarctica, a place so remote that it has rarely been thoroughly explored. Some have suggested that it might be the detachment of an ice plate sliding slowly down an underwater slope. But its duration, Tone and the distance it reached make that theory more of a patch than a solution. Most of these sounds were recorded by chance. No one was looking for them, and perhaps that's why they are so baffling. Because they don't follow a predictable pattern. They appear, are recorded, and then they vanish. Some, like Upsweep, return regularly. Others, like Julia or Slow Down, appear once and disappear forever. In all cases, the mystery remains. All that's left is an acoustic signature, a spectrogram, a line on a graph that says something vibrated, something broke the silence of the deep ocean, and we don't know what it was. There have been attempts to link them to known phenomena: submarine volcanic eruptions, tectonic plate collisions, glacier detachments, even secret military tests. But none of these hypotheses can explain all the cases. Often, there's no correlation with geological events. Other times, the location where the sound originates shows no visible anomalies. Some have even thought that some might be technical interference or recording equipment failures, though that idea was discarded when it was confirmed that the sounds were captured by different devices in different locations at the same time. There's something unsettling about the way these sounds behave, because they are not entirely random, but they are not completely regular either. They sit right on that uncomfortable line between the natural and the artificial. Some have such a defined structure that they resemble signals. Not human, perhaps, but not the result of chaos either. Others seem organic, as if coming from a creature that inhabits the deepest regions of the sea, a creature we don't know and may not even imagine well. The deep ocean remains the least explored territory on the planet. More than 80% remains unmapped, untraveled, unobserved. It's a world unto itself, with its own rules, its own rhythms, and perhaps its own inhabitants. In that context, unexplained sounds are not a rarity, but a clue, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Marine life communicates in complex ways: frequencies, pulses, chemical signals. If something lives down there, far from the light and heat, it could very well have a way of speaking unlike anything we know. And that possibility is as fascinating as it is bewildering. Some oceanographers have begun studying these sounds not from the perspective of physics but from biology. They are trying to determine whether there are patterns compatible with animal vocalizations. Although they haven't found exact equivalents, they have detected subtle similarities with certain acoustic behaviors of large cetaceans. But the known animals do not produce sounds this low, this long, or this intense. The conclusion is not that it's impossible, but that it could be a completely different species, perhaps older, more isolated, or more adapted to an area where evolution has followed a parallel path. In the midst of this labyrinth of hypotheses, recordings, and conjectures, the truth is that the sounds are still there. Recorded, analyzed, shared in scientific databases, but without a definitive explanation. They are fragments of an unknown language, as if the ocean had something to say, but we weren't speaking the right language to understand it. Every time a new one appears, the unease returns, because we are not talking about a theory or a legend. These are real data, real vibrations. Waves traveling through the water with enough force to shake the seafloor and reach thousands of miles away. Maybe the sea is full of voices we don't hear. Maybe we're not the only ones who leave a sonic mark on this planet. And while the hydrophones keep watch in silence, night after night, amid invisible currents and underwater landscapes that still have no name, maybe something, in some distant corner, is still emitting its deep song, waiting for a response that hasn't arrived yet. The ghost ship of the Bermuda Triangle. In the vast blue expanse of the Western Atlantic, there is an area that, for decades, has been shrouded in a mist of suspicion, mystery, and silence. The Bermuda Triangle, defined by imaginary points between Miami, the Bermuda Islands, and Puerto Rico, is more than just a maritime space. It is a symbol of the unknown. There, planes have disappeared without leaving debris, ships have vanished without sending distress signals, and people have gone missing without a trace. But among all the stories, there is one that stands out as one of the most powerful images of the enigma. The discovery of a ghost ship, intact, adrift, without a crew, and with no reasonable explanation as to how it could have ended up that way. The story that has fueled this legend the most is that of the SS Cotopaxi, a U.S. cargo ship that left Charleston, South Carolina, in November 1925 bound for Havana, Cuba. It was carrying a load of coal and had a crew of 32 men. The journey was supposed to last only a few days, but the ship never arrived at port. It disappeared somewhere in the ocean without emitting distress signals, without reports of malfunction or bad weather. It was as if the Atlantic had swallowed it effortlessly, silently, without warning. For years, it was just one more in the long list of unresolved cases in the Bermuda Triangle. What came next elevated the story to another level. In 2015, news broke that a ship matching the characteristics of the Cotopaxi had been found off the coast of Cuba, rusted but intact, covered in algae and salt, floating aimlessly. Authorities could not find any recent records of the vessel. There were no signs of life, no documents, and no human remains. The metal plates confirmed that it was the same ship that had disappeared 90 years earlier. And the most unsettling part was its condition. It didn't appear to have sunk, nor had it been damaged by storms or boardings. It was as if it had crossed time, as if it had been waiting in some corner of the ocean until someone came across it again. Although doubts about the authenticity of the discovery later emerged, the story of the Cotopaxi struck a deep chord because it reflects something greater. It is a symbol of a narrative that repeats itself again and again. Ships that vanish without a trace, and sometimes reappear years later, empty, as if their crew had suddenly abandoned the world without touching anything, without fighting, without even opening a hatch. Many other similar cases have been recorded since the 19th century. Merchant ships, recreational yachts, fishing boats, all found floating, without signs of violence or sinking, but completely deserted. One of the most well-known is that of the Carol A. Deering, an American brigantine found stranded off the coast of North Carolina in 1921. The crew had completely disappeared. The kitchen still had food halfway through preparation. The navigation logs had been torn from their place, and the lifeboats were gone. There were no signs of struggle or structural damage. The sails were neatly arranged. Everything seemed frozen in time, as if those who had lived there had vanished in an instant, leaving everything behind. The official investigation never reached any clear conclusions. Within the Bermuda Triangle, intense ocean currents, peculiar electromagnetic fields, and shifting weather conditions have converged. Some meteorologists and oceanographers have suggested that phenomena such as monster waves, giant waves that appear suddenly in open water, could be responsible for many disappearances. Others have pointed to navigation system failures due to magnetic variations in the area. It has even been suggested that pockets of methane trapped in the seabed, when released, could reduce the density of the water and cause a ship to sink without warning. However, none of these explanations account for all the cases, especially those involving ships found intact but deserted. The mystery of ghost ships, like the Cotopaxi, strikes a deeper chord than mere astonishment at a disappearance. It is the emptiness that unsettles, the total absence of clues. The fact that a vessel built to withstand the unpredictable sea can be found years later without a soul aboard, yet with no visible signs of what happened. That absence becomes the center of everything. Where are the people? What made them disappear without a trace? What could cause such a perfect and silent abandonment? The theories range from the scientific to the fantastical. Some have proposed the existence of marine vortices that act as temporal portals, although there is no real evidence of such a phenomenon. Others speak of experimental technologies that alter space or time. Some go further, pointing to intelligent non-human life forms that may operate from the depths or from parallel dimensions. All of this sounds exaggerated, and perhaps it is. But so too is the fact that these ships appear without crews, and in many cases, not even the bodies are found. No distress signals, no footprints, nothing. Researchers who have tried to find a more human explanation suggest that many cases could involve mutinies, sudden illnesses, pirate attacks, or abandonment due to fear during storms. All are logical possibilities, but often the evidence does not support any of them. There are no indications that anyone tried to escape, nor any proof of violence. Only that immense silence floating over the water, as if the ocean knows more than it lets on. Beyond the Cotopaxi, there are dozens of other cases that feed the legend of the triangle. From small fishing boats to large merchant vessels, all with the same constant. They disappear or appear empty, as if there were an invisible crack in that stretch of sea that occasionally opens and swallows whatever it finds. No one has been able to prove that the triangle has physical properties different from other places on the planet, but neither has anyone been able to completely deny the recurring pattern, and that is what keeps the myth alive. Because the sea, with all its beauty, is also a stage for the impossible. It is not just water, it is history, memory, and shadow. A space where ships can set sail with their crews and return turned into specters. Where the logbooks remain blank, the compasses spin in circles, and the wind, for some unknown reason, seems to whisper names that no one else remembers. The Cotopaxi, real or not, continues to float in the collective imagination. It represents the materialization of an ancient fear. The fear of being lost in the deep, of being swallowed by the invisible, of not leaving even a final word. And as the ocean continues to hide what it knows, the ships will keep crossing the Bermuda Triangle with one eye on the compass and another on the horizon, hoping that if something ever happens, someone will find them, or at least remember them. Or at the Java Trench, echoes of an unknown activity. At the edge of the Indian Ocean, like a deep scar beneath the waters, lies the Java Trench, also known as the Sunda Trench. Unlike its more famous sibling, the Mariana Trench, this trench rarely makes headlines, doesn't have the same reputation or the same number of recorded scientific expeditions. However, what happens down there, beneath the frozen folds of the Earth's crust, has begun to raise growing concern among oceanographers and seismologists, because something is vibrating inside, something is moving, something is murmuring from those depths. These are signals, pulses, and patterns that no one has yet fully deciphered, but they are there, constant, as if a colossal machine is running beneath the sea. The Java Trench plunges more than 7,000 meters at its deepest point and stretches over more than 3,000 kilometers, tracing a curved line south of Indonesia. It is a zone where tectonic plates collide, a living boundary between the Indo-Australian plate and the Eurasian plate. This constant friction has made the region a natural epicenter for earthquakes and tsunamis, like the devastating tsunami of December 2004. From a geological perspective, it is an active, unpredictable, and dangerous zone. However, in recent years, monitoring instruments have begun to register something more than earthquakes. The first signs arrived subtly, low-frequency sounds, well below the threshold of human hearing, captured by hydrophones installed on the seabed to study the seismic activity of the region. At first, it was believed to be noises associated with the plates, small fractures, minor displacements. But the frequency and structure of the sounds did not match that type of activity. They were too rhythmic, too consistent, too prolonged. Some patterns repeated every few days, as if responding to a cycle. Others were more erratic, but equally intense. And the most unsettling was their exact origin. They did not match any known fault or any usual volcanic activity point. The captured waves were deep, slow, with a cadence that resembled more the pulse of a living creature than the tremor of rock. Of course, that doesn't mean they come from a biological being, but their acoustic profile clashes with what one would expect from a purely mineral environment. Researchers have tried to pinpoint the exact source of the sounds through triangulation, but the terrain's complexity and the distortions inherent to water at those depths make the results uncertain. What is known is that the echoes are concentrated in a specific area at the center of the trench, where the seafloor forms a kind of secondary depression, a hole within the abyss. Some have ventured to call this area the dark chamber, because even the most advanced underwater drones have struggled to capture clear images of the bottom. There are violent currents that interfere with the sensors, sharp drops in temperature, and an accumulation of sediments that clouds the water to extreme levels. The robots sent back inconclusive recordings, digital noise, or simply hours of absolute darkness, as if something at that particular point blocked observation. And yet, the echoes come from there. Underground pulses continue to emit, sometimes louder, sometimes almost imperceptible, but never in total silence. This type of phenomenon has opened the door to multiple interpretations. Some insist on a purely geophysical explanation. Large pockets of methane gas trapped between layers of sediment, slowly releasing due to pressure, which would generate regular acoustic vibrations. It's a possible hypothesis, but one that has not been proven at the site. Others point to volcanic structures not yet mapped, active vents that, because they are so deep and isolated, have gone unnoticed. However, neither the temperature levels nor the chemical emissions recorded in the area fully support that theory. There is a general sense that something doesn't fit. What confounds experts the most is that despite the recorded acoustic activity, no correlation has been observed with any other natural phenomenon. There are no detectable earthquakes on the surface, no visible seabed disturbances by satellite, no unusual thermal signals. Everything happens in silence, beneath the threshold of our conventional technology, as if the abyss knows how to hide. For now, science is limited to listening, recording, accumulating data that still lacks interpretation. There is something primal about the idea of listening without understanding, of capturing a message but not knowing if it's a warning, a coincidence, or a random feature of the environment. Some biologists have suggested the possibility that certain deep-sea organisms, still unknown, may generate waves of that type. It has been discovered that some squids, fish, and jellyfish-like creatures can emit sounds at very low frequencies as part of their navigation or communication mechanisms. But no known species could emit a signal with that strength, maintain it for so long, or generate such a complex pattern. And then come the more speculative theories. Not empty fantasies, but ideas that arise when science faces something it cannot measure. Some believe the Java Trench could harbor a form of tectonic activity completely different from what we know, a type of slow internal movement, like a geological breath, that we have not yet identified as such. Others wonder if beneath those layers of rock, beyond the reach of any probe, there could be a gigantic cavity, a hollow chamber fed by internal planetary processes, capable of generating resonances we still do not understand. The truth is, the records continue. Every month, new data is added, new recordings, new vibrations, but none of them provide a definitive answer. The Java Trench keeps emitting its echoes, and the scientific community, though divided, acknowledges that there is something down there that deserves more attention. New expeditions have been proposed, though the cost, complexity, and instability of the region make progress slow. In the meantime, all that can be done is to keep listening, waiting for, at some point, the pattern to break, repeat, or reveal something more. The feeling that there is a presence, that something is moving without being seen, is not a product of the imagination. It is what happens when knowledge meets its own limits. The Java Trench, with its curved shape and its silence interrupted by pulses that cannot fully be explained, has become one of the most unsettling places on the planet. because there are no visible monsters or lost cities. Only echoes. Echoes that resonate from a place where the sea does not touch the light, where the earth vibrates with a language we still do not understand, but that insists every day on being heard. The underwater columns of the Caribbean. Throughout the Western Caribbean, hidden beneath warm turquoise waters, between gentle currents and coral banks that seem like submerged gardens, rise formations that shouldn't be there. These are not reefs nor volcanic mountains. They are columns. Tall, solitary, standing as if placed intentionally. At first glance, they might appear to be natural structures, stone pillars shaped by erosion or time. But as they are studied in more detail, the feeling changes. The symmetry, the order, the almost perfect verticality of some of them, and their arrangement in lines, raise questions that have not yet been answered clearly. These columns were discovered accidentally during a scientific expedition near the Yucatan Channel, when a team mapping the seabed by sonar came across what appeared to be a kind of forest of towers. The images showed dozens of elongated structures with regular bases, rising from the ocean floor at depths between 600 and 800 meters. Most were more than 10 meters tall, some exceeded 20. The width was uniform, and the most puzzling thing, many of them were aligned, not scattered randomly as in normal geological formations, but organized as if responding to a design. The first analyses tried to classify these formations as common rock pinnacles, the result of limestone dissolution in the presence of marine currents, a phenomenon that occurs in certain areas, especially in karst coastlines where water acts as a shaping agent. However, the collected samples showed that these were not common sedimentary rock, but an extremely compact type of basalt, more typical of ancient volcanic flows than recent marine deposits. This fact contradicted the initial explanation. How could there be volcanic columns in an area that showed no evident volcanic activity? Over time, more explorations have confirmed the presence of these structures near Cuba, Jamaica, and even off the coast of Colombia. While their distribution is not continuous, it does seem to form part of a dispersed chain, as if they had been part of a larger formation that was fragmented by earthquakes, landslides, or the action of the sea. What stands out is that there are no fallen remains, nor accumulations of debris around them. The columns stand firm, clean, as if the environment had respected them, or as if they had been placed on a hidden, more solid base than what has been verified so far. In some of them, high-resolution scans show natural inscriptions on the surface. But among those lines worn by the passage of thousands of years, there are shapes that do not align with random processes. Parallel lines, perpendicular marks, depressions that seem symmetrical, and one in particular that shows a kind of spiral carved with such clarity that it is hard to believe it is the work of chance. The scientists who have studied them directly in manned dives do not entirely rule out human intervention in their formation, although they acknowledge that, if this were true, we would be talking about a work built when the sea level was tens of meters below its current point. The geological history of the Caribbean is complex, and it has changed drastically over the last 20,000 years. During the last ice age, large portions of the sea were dry land. There is evidence that some areas now submerged were islands connected by natural bridges or even habitable plains. If human settlements existed there, their traces would have been buried under tons of water when the glaciers melted. This opens up a troubling possibility that these columns were part of a larger structure, perhaps a ceremonial building, a system of pillars, or what some dare to call an oceanic temple. Local legends, gathered from fishing communities in the Caribbean, mention formations that glow under the water, or columns that point to the sky from the depths. Although these are stories passed down orally, without direct archaeological backing, they have drawn attention due to their persistence. Several fishermen claim to have seen, on certain moonless nights, a shadow in the water, straighter than a rock, taller than a wave. Some divers who have explored the area out of curiosity describe a sense of disorientation when swimming among the columns, as if the place had its own magnetic field, or a different atmosphere, denser, tenser. All kinds of theories have been proposed, from tectonic phenomena that would have pushed up columns of solidified lava to the possibility that they are remnants of a vanished civilization that mastered advanced construction techniques. Some have even compared them to the megaliths of Baalbek or the structures of Nan Madol, drawing forced but not entirely illogical parallels. What all these formations share is the aura of the impossible. They are there, complete, enormous, impossible to ignore, and yet no one can fully explain how they got there or for what purpose. What aggravates the mystery is that there are no written records, nor clear legends that speak of a culture living beneath the sea in this region. Nor is there a direct connection with the indigenous peoples of the continental Caribbean, whose cultures left traces on dry land. This has led to the thought that if the columns have human origins, they would belong to an earlier settlement, possibly from an era so ancient that it was destroyed by climatic changes and disappeared without leaving much of a trace, except for these stone columns that refuse to collapse. Some scientists have tried to close the debate by pointing out that, in the absence of conclusive evidence, the most sensible thing is to assume that this is an uncommon geological formation. However, there is one detail that is often overlooked. Efforts to study the area have been interrupted several times. Sonar equipment failing for no apparent reason, underwater drones losing connection, and a strange silence around the more technical reports. Some investigations conducted by private universities were filed without explanation, as if someone preferred to keep the mystery intact without delving too deeply. Whatever the truth, the underwater columns of the Caribbean remain there, silent, motionless, trapped between history and doubt. They are not a tourist attraction, nor an academic priority, but they have something that captivates, that stirs the imagination, because they are where they shouldn't be, because their shape doesn't match the random, and because each one of them seems to have been placed with an intention lost in time. Those who have seen them say there is something solemn in their presence, something that commands respect, as if, deep in that corner of the ocean, there still remains a fragment of a story that no one has been able to tell. The whale cemetery of the South Pacific. In a remote corner of the South Pacific, among the deep waters that stretch into the vastness of nothingness, there exists a place few have approached, and even fewer dare to speak of with certainty. It is a stretch of sea with no official name, far from commercial routes, beyond the reach of most scientific expeditions, and covered by a constant layer of silence. There, at the bottom of the ocean, hides a baffling phenomenon that has been informally named by the few who know of it as the Whale Cemetery. It was accidentally discovered a few years ago when an underwater mapping mission, focused on studying the tectonic plates of the seabed east of New Zealand, detected a series of unusual anomalies. They were bodies, dozens of them, spread in scattered but strangely organized patterns, all of the same type. Whale skeletons, some partially intact, others nearly dissolved by time. They were not gathered as if swept together by currents after a failed migration, nor were they part of a bank of carcasses left by a sudden catastrophe. No, they were spaced out, resting with a stillness that seemed deliberate, as though each one had reached this point on its own, for a specific reason. At first glance, one might think it is simply a natural accumulation of marine remains. After all, whales travel thousands of kilometers throughout their lives, and many die in the open sea, leaving their bodies at the mercy of the currents. But what sets this site apart from any other discovery is the quantity and the repetition, because this was not an isolated find. After the initial discovery, other scientific teams, using multi-beam scanning technology and autonomous vehicles, detected more locations with similar concentrations. In total, more than 120 skeletons have been recorded along an oceanic strip that stretches for several hundred kilometers. No other part of the ocean has anything like it. The mystery deepens when the finer data is analyzed. Most of the skeletons belong to humpback whales, but remains of sperm whales and fin whales have also been found. The ages vary, from young adults to elderly individuals, some with bones so eroded that their presence speaks of a death that occurred decades ago, perhaps more. However, there is no clear evidence of diseases, visible wounds, or signs of attacks, nor are there signs of nets, hooks, or human presence. The whales seem to have descended to this place of their own accord, or by a force we do not yet understand. Some marine biologists have suggested that it could be a final resting zone, a kind of acoustic, magnetic, or sensory landmark that whales are drawn to in the final moments of their lives. It is known that these animals possess an extraordinary sensitivity to sound and magnetic fields, which allows them to navigate thousands of kilometers across the sea with a precision that surpasses even many technological systems. Perhaps, in that deep corner of the Pacific, there exists a natural anomaly that calls to them. A kind of silent lighthouse. A specific vibration that transmits a final direction. A destination they must reach to die. Another, more unsettling theory suggests that these whales do not arrive there of their own will, but because something draws them in, something that interrupts their natural routes, disorienting them gradually until they reach a point of no return. Some researchers have begun tracking patterns in underwater sound recordings obtained near the cemetery. What they have found are unusual frequencies, constant hums, and low-intensity pulses that do not match the usual noise of the sea or human signals. They are not interference or technical errors. They are real, and they are there, vibrating beneath the water like a distant whisper, continuous, impossible to locate completely. At the seabed, the conditions are harsh. There, the pressure crushes, the darkness is total, and the temperature hovers just above freezing. Despite this, these bodies remain relatively well preserved. Some still retain part of the tissue, and others have created entire microhabitats. Communities of organisms feeding on the remains, living among the bones, like small parallel worlds built upon a giant death. But the most striking thing is that many of these skeletons are oriented in the same direction, as if they had fallen there following a common trajectory. As if all these whales had swum together toward a predetermined end. Such discoveries have raised alarms among some sectors of the scientific community, not because of the mystery itself, but because of what might be happening without anyone noticing. Because if the whales are dying at the same point in the ocean, over and over again, it may be because something has changed. It could be an environmental phenomenon yet to be documented, such as a toxic gas leak from the ocean floor, or even a disruption in migratory patterns caused by human-originated acoustic pollution. Submarines, military sonars, oil platforms, these all generate noise that can severely alter the behavior of cetaceans. And if that noise concentrates in certain areas, the result could be fatal. But there is also another possibility, more difficult to prove and easier to ignore. That it is not an accident, nor an environmental failure, nor a disease. That this place in the South Pacific is, in fact, a kind of final sanctuary. A space that the whales have known for millennia, and that we are just beginning to detect. Because in their long journeys, these creatures cross hemispheres, survive seasonal changes, and transmit knowledge across generations. It is not impossible to imagine that, at some level of their collective consciousness, they know where they must go to die. That they have memory of the places where their ancestors last rested. Whatever the explanation, the truth is that the whale cemetery is not a minor anomaly. It is a testament to something profound that is happening beneath the surface. It is a sign that we still ignore much of the mechanisms that govern animal behavior in the oceans. And above all, it is a warning that there are places in the world that remain beyond our control, where death accumulates in silence, without headlines, without cameras, without noise. The images captured by the underwater drones show a breathtaking landscape. Curved bones like stone arches, ribs floating like dry branches, jaws open toward nothingness. All of it covered by a thin layer of sediment, barely illuminated by the artificial light of the probes. It is a still, vast vision that conveys more respect than fear. As if the ocean had created its own mausoleum, as if the sea had chosen this place to keep a part of its history. Written in enormous bodies stacked without order, yet with a strange beauty. Perhaps, someday, we will understand what is really happening in that forgotten stretch of the South Pacific. Maybe we will decipher the signals, recognize the pattern, or confirm that it is a repeated coincidence. But until then, the whale cemetery will remain there, invisible to the world, silent, eternal, like a reminder that death at the bottom of the sea can also be a mystery. The voices of the abyss sound similar to language. At the bottom of the ocean, where the sun has never touched a surface, where time seems to have stopped between the brutal pressure and the absolute darkness, there are echoes that defy any attempt at understanding. These are not just simple noises. They are not tremors, explosions, or muffled sounds from moving tectonic plates. These are organized, rhythmic sounds that repeat with structure, change frequency, rise and fall as if they have a beat, as if they are constructed with a clear intention. Some have described them as pulses, others as sequences of notes. But those who have listened carefully agree on one unsettling detail. They sound like a voice. The sea has always had its own acoustic codes. Whales emit complex songs that vary by region, much like dialects. Dolphins use clicks to transmit detailed information to each other. Even some fish, by rubbing parts of their bodies, emit specific vibrations to communicate. However, what has started to be detected in the last few decades goes beyond all of this. These are sounds that do not fit any known animal pattern, sounds that are not related to geological echoes or human interference, but to something different, something we have not been able to classify, because their structure closely resembles language. The first of these recordings was captured almost by accident. It was in 1999 in the Pacific Ocean, during an acoustic monitoring campaign in an area where blue whale songs were expected to be recorded. Instead, the hydrophones picked up a sequence of sounds that did not belong to any known cetacean. They were rhythmic, modulated sequences with regular pauses. They had a distinct repetition, but also internal variations, as if they were phrases with accent, tone, intention. When played faster or slower, even more defined structures appeared. It wasn't music. It wasn't babbling. It was something that, instinctively, the human ear identified as a form of speech. This phenomenon did not occur just once. In the following years, in different parts of the world, other sounds with similar characteristics were recorded. In some cases, underwater microphones picked up what seemed like a conversation between two sources, separated by miles, but emitting almost mirrored sequences with perfectly timed intervals. In other cases, the sound appeared as a series of seemingly meaningless syllables, but with such a precise cadence that it was hard not to associate it with some kind of communication. Always at low frequencies, nearly imperceptible to the human ear, and always from extreme depths. The scientists who analyzed these recordings decided to give some of them informal names. The voice of Kerguelen, the dialogue of shadows, the C-15 sequence. These are names without scientific significance, but they reflect the general sense of encountering something that does not fit. Initial explanations pointed to new species of whales or giant squids that might have communication mechanisms not yet studied. It's possible. But so far, no expedition has been able to directly link one of these sounds to a visible animal. The drones sent to the coordinates of origin return without clear images. There is no trace, only the sound. One of the most puzzling aspects is that several of these recordings have been produced in areas considered dead from a biological standpoint. Areas with little oxygen, no marine vegetation, no large concentrations of fauna. They are not places where you would expect to find new species. And yet, the sounds repeat, sometimes with months in between, other times every few days. In one of the most curious cases, the same sound pattern was detected at two opposite points on the planet, with only seconds of difference. An echo that seemed to come from one point and bounce to the other, as if something, or someone, was sending a message that we still don't know how to read. Many theories have been proposed. Some try to find an explanation within the boundaries of biology. Unknown creatures that have evolved in such extreme conditions that their language has followed a completely different path. Other, more radical theories suggest the possibility of non-human intelligence. Not necessarily extraterrestrial, but something that has inhabited the ocean since before we walked on land. An intelligence hidden in the depths, silent, patient, watching without intervening, and only emitting sound at specific moments. Skeptics, of course, warn about the danger of projecting our own expectations onto incomplete data. The history of science is full of cases where patterns were misinterpreted, statistical coincidences that seemed significant but were not. And they are right. But even the most conservative researchers admit that these recordings do not resemble any other known phenomenon. They are not simple coincidences. The repetition, organization, and distribution of these sounds point to something more. Some linguists have been invited to analyze the spectrograms without knowing their origin. What they've noticed is that the internal structure of these sounds meets certain conditions typical of language. There are minimal units that repeat, combinations that are not random, and pauses that could be interpreted as punctuation marks. This is not about translation, far from it, but rather about recognizing patterns that, in other contexts, would indicate a complex communication system. The big obstacle for now is the lack of constant access to these locations. The depths of the sea are difficult, expensive, and dangerous to explore. Most of the equipment capable of recording these sounds works for limited periods, and their data must be filtered through thousands of hours of marine noise recordings. It's a slow, unglamorous task, but crucial. Because every new sound, every new repetition, brings us one step closer to understanding what's behind it. And in the meantime, the sounds keep coming. They haven't stopped. In some cases, their frequency has increased. In others, they've changed tone, as if responding to an alteration in the environment. Some researchers have noted that certain emissions coincide with sudden climate changes, underwater eruptions, or even military tests. It's not easy to draw conclusions, but the coincidence is recorded. And that opens up another possibility. That whoever is emitting these sounds is not only speaking, but listening. The voices of the abyss are real. They are recorded, documented, archived in laboratories around the world. They are sounds we do not understand, but they remind us that beneath us, there is a world we have yet to explore. A world where communication may not be a privilege of our species, where silence does not mean absence, where the sea, from its darkest depths, may be speaking in a language we do not yet know, but which has already started making us listen. The Dragon's Blue Hole, portal to the past. In the waters of the South China Sea, where the wind blows with a deceptive calm and the color of the ocean turns into a hypnotic mass of blues, there exists an opening that has sparked the silent fascination of both scientists and sailors alike. This is the so-called Dragon's Blue Hole, an underwater well that descends vertically over 300 meters into the earth, as if the sea had decided to open itself in an act of profound introspection. What makes this hole special is not just its size, which even surpasses the famous Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas, but the aura of timelessness that surrounds it. It is, in many ways, a door, but not to another place, to another time. Blue holes are unique geological formations. Essentially, they are collapsed caves that, over the centuries, became flooded by the sea. Their vertical shape, smooth walls, and clear waters make them natural traps for anything that falls into them. Some house-closed ecological systems, nearly intact for thousands of years. Others have become repositories of bones, objects, and fossils that exist nowhere else in the world. And the Dragon's Hole is no exception. Since its total depth was measured in 2016, its exploration has become a complex task, not only due to technical difficulties, but also because of what it represents: a journey into the unknown. The entrance to the hole is wide, with a diameter of nearly 130 meters. Seen from above, it resembles a giant eye silently watching, surrounded by reefs that partially conceal it, as if nature itself wanted to protect it from human hands. As you descend its walls, sunlight quickly fades, and what starts as a turquoise blue transforms into a liquid shadow, dense, where color disappears and only the feeling of depth remains. As you go deeper, oxygen levels fall, the temperature changes, and the water becomes heavier, thicker, as if time itself were slowing down. The first drones sent to the bottom found what no one expected: life. Not abundant life, nor spectacular, but organisms capable of adapting to an environment where oxygen is nearly absent and where nutrients are scarce. Sulfur-eating bacteria, small crustaceans dwelling in crevices, and traces of species that have not been seen anywhere else on the planet. Some of these life forms may have evolved in isolation for thousands of years, without contact with the rest of the ocean, as if the blue hole had served as a time-sealed capsule. The chemical composition of its inner layers is even more perplexing. From a certain point, the water begins to separate into strata that do not mix with each other. It's as if the hole is made up of different overlapping environments, each with its own geological history, its own climate, and perhaps its own biological record. In some of these strata, concentrations of metals and compounds have been detected that should not be there, remnants of an activity that harkens back to times before our modern era. This has led some scientists to consider that, at its bottom, the Dragon's Hole preserves an intact sample of Earth's primordial seas. And it is not just romantic speculation. Sediment samples taken from the bottom contain microfossils dating back tens of thousands of years, and in some cases, even more. They are tiny but crucial biological structures because they could help understand how life developed in extreme environments. Diatoms that don't exist anywhere else in the ocean have been found, life forms that seem frozen in a primitive stage, as if time in the hole had stopped before the rest of the world moved forward. However, the most shocking part is not what has been found, but what still remains unanswered. From 200 meters deep, recordings become more difficult. Pressure begins to deform the drone structures. Visibility is reduced to almost zero, and acoustic signals are interrupted by a constant background hum that no one has been able to fully explain. It is not technical interference. It is not current noise. It is a low, continuous vibration that seems to emerge from the very walls of the hole, as if something were vibrating inside the rock, as if there were an internal echo that doesn't come from the outside, but from what is buried deep inside. Some scholars have suggested that this vibration could be due to the accumulation of gases trapped in underground bubbles, or even to minor seismic movements. But none of these phenomena appear with the regularity shown in the hole's records. Others believe that the water could be crashing into hidden chambers within the rock, creating resonances. Whatever the case, the truth is that this vibration has been there since the studies began, and it has not stopped. It is like a heartbeat, soft, deep, monotonous, a constant reminder that beneath our feet, the world is still alive, and perhaps remembers more than we think. There have been those who associate the Dragon's Hole with local legends. In Chinese tradition, the dragon is a creature linked to water, to the power flowing beneath the surface, to the secrets of the natural world that cannot be mastered. Some local fishermen speak of times when the sea breathed differently near the hole, of days when the water would change color for no reason, or of nights when the sound emanating from below could be heard even from the boats, like a vibration that crept into the bones. These are stories that have no scientific backing but are passed down with the same solemnity with which one speaks of a sacred tomb. Because in the end, that seems to be what this place is. A natural tomb of ancient seas, an archive of the earth sealed by layers of water and pressure. A place where the conditions of the planet have been preserved unaltered for thousands of years, waiting for someone to dare to look. And in doing so, discovering that the past is not as far away as we think, that it still breathes beneath the surface, in corners where light has never reached. The Dragon's Blue Hole is not just a geological wonder. It is an invitation to awe, a reminder that even in this hyper-connected world, there are cracks that open to the unknown. And if the sea is the guardian of the planet's oldest secrets, this vertical well is its deepest archive. A place that, without speaking, says everything. That, without moving, recalls what the world was before we knew it. Hexagonal structures of the Gulf of Aden. In one of the most turbulent and enigmatic corners of the Indian Ocean, right in the narrow channel connecting the Arabian Sea with the Red Sea, lies the Gulf of Aden, a region known for its intense currents, constant tectonic activity, and its strategic geopolitical importance. However, what many do not know is that beneath the surface, stirred by the continuous passage of cargo ships and military routes, lies one of the most baffling phenomena detected on the seafloor in recent years: the appearance of giant hexagonal formations that defy both the laws of geology and the logic of nature. The story began with a series of oceanographic studies aimed at mapping the bottom of the Gulf. The original idea was simple: to study in more detail the tectonic fractures of the area, as the Gulf lies on the boundary between the African and Arabian plates, a region where the Earth's crust is slowly opening, causing earthquakes and hydrothermal emissions. However, what the scans revealed was completely unexpected. Just over 1,000 meters deep, in a strip about 50 kilometers long, geometric structures appeared, stretching across the bottom like a carefully carved pattern. They were six-sided figures, perfectly connected, covering the ground with a disturbing symmetry. The technicians aboard the ship initially thought it was an interpretation error. Perhaps a sonar system malfunction, a distortion caused by the irregular water conditions in that region. But the images were consistent. In several successive sweeps, the pattern repeated itself. Even when changing angles, using different wavelengths, the shapes remained. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of hexagonal shapes carved into the seafloor, as if someone, in a distant past, had decided to cover that part of the world with an enormous network of stone cells. The most immediate comparisons that arose were with the basalt formations found in the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, or on the island of Staffa in Scotland. In those places, basalt columns adopt hexagonal shapes due to the contraction of lava during cooling. It's a well-documented process, with results that seem almost artificial. But there is a fundamental difference. In the Gulf of Aden, the structures do not emerge as vertical columns, but extend horizontally, as if they had been placed on the ground. Furthermore, their distribution does not follow the logic of volcanic flow, nor is there close evidence of eruptive activity that could explain their origin. There are no volcanic cones, no fractures associated with heat, no molten rocks. The composition of these formations also raises more questions than answers. Samples taken by robotic submarines revealed an unusual mix of minerals: silica, iron, and a series of compounds that do not usually appear together in such proportions in nature. Some experts suggested that we might be dealing with a type of metamorphic rock subjected to extreme pressures. But even if that were the case, no other part of the world has been found with a natural formation of this size and such a regular and precise pattern. The precision of the angles, the continuity between cells, the absence of irregular fractures, all suggest there is an implied order, a planned structure. This idea, clearly, triggered a wave of theories. Some ventured that it could be the remnants of a lost human construction, perhaps from a culture that predated the last great thaw. Others spoke of a submerged base, an artificial platform eroded by thousands of years of pressure and salinity. And there were those who mentioned extraterrestrial technology, as often happens in such cases where science has yet to provide a definitive explanation. But beyond the speculations, the real and tangible fact is that the structures are there, that they have been recorded, photographed, measured, and that no one has yet been able to convincingly explain how they formed. Some researchers have tried to link these structures to acoustic phenomena recorded in the region. For more than 2 decades, underwater vibrations have been detected in the Gulf of Aden that do not correspond to earthquakes or tectonic movements. These are deep, persistent sounds that repeat at certain frequencies and seem to emanate from the same area where the hexagonal patterns are found. Sometimes they last for minutes. Other times they appear in bursts lasting only a few seconds. The combination of these sounds with the seafloor formations has led to thoughts of a possible interaction that has not yet been understood. Could these structures act as natural resonators? Or perhaps as emitters? What is most puzzling is that despite the potential relevance of the discovery, subsequent studies have been scarce. Research missions have decreased, and the data collected has not been shared with the same openness that typically characterizes international oceanographic investigations. Some attribute this to strategic interests. The Gulf of Aden is a high-tension military zone, a crucial route for global trade, and a region where foreign naval presence is constant. It is possible that the governments involved prefer not to fuel speculation about an area that is already delicate. Either way, the mystery remains on pause. The few scientists who have continued to investigate the subject independently claim that there is still much to discover. The latest available images show new formations farther east, seeming to extend the pattern beyond the initial area. Some of these structures are not completely submerged, but are located in sloped areas, making them more accessible for direct analysis. Wear marks have also been detected, which could indicate an age of more than 20,000 years. But these are all fragments, loose pieces of a puzzle that still does not fit. Some believe the hexagonal pattern follows a logic that is neither geological nor tectonic, but symbolic. In several ancient cultures, the hexagonal shape has held special significance, associated with order, repetition, and cosmic harmony. Bees use it in their hives for efficiency, but it also appears in crystals, molecules, and fundamental structures of life. It is a shape that tends toward balance. What if, deep in the ocean, that same shape had been replicated on a giant scale, not as an accident, but as a message? To this day, the hexagonal structures of the Gulf of Aden remain one of the most peculiar geological mysteries of the seafloor. They are there, waiting for us. With their perfect shape, their challenging symmetry, their centuries of silence. Perhaps one day, when science has more tools, we will descend clearly into that network of mineral cells and finally decipher what the ancient language of the ocean is made of. Creatures without explanation. The case of the Arctic blob. In the icy waters of the Arctic, where life moves slowly under eternal layers of ice, something happened that left even seasoned scientists baffled and opened the door to one of the most puzzling biological mysteries of recent decades. It occurred during a routine mission while monitoring species in the Chukchi Sea, northeast of Siberia, when a team of researchers found the unexpected. A gelatinous mass, irregular in shape, suspended between 30 and 50 meters deep, that seemed to float with an unnatural calm in an environment where everything appears to be pushed by currents or compressed by the cold. The discovery was recorded by a remotely operated submersible, which was collecting plankton samples. In the middle of nowhere, the camera captured a translucent figure, expansive, with no defined edges, and a texture reminiscent of a jellyfish, but with a structure completely foreign to any known organism. It had no tentacles, no radial symmetry. It did not contract nor swim. It was like an inert body, yet disturbingly alive. It remained suspended for several minutes, swaying as if breathing. The team nicknamed it the Arctic blob, a simple name for something no one knew how to classify. They attempted to collect a sample. The submersible's robotic arm approached with extreme caution, but as soon as it touched, the substance deformed, folding as if it were fleeing. It didn't break apart or fragment as a jellyfish would when harmed. Rather, it seemed to absorb the contact, reshaping itself into a new form, as if its structure were made of thousands of layers of the same fluid, dense, elastic, and sensitive. When they tried to capture it with a collection capsule, the mass split in two, slowly separating, and began to descend, sinking calmly into the depths, until it disappeared completely into the darkness. What remained was a video sequence, some pressure and temperature data, and an absolute silence when it came to explanations. No one on the team had seen anything like it. In the following days, they reviewed databases of gelatinous species, scans of soft organisms, abyssal life records. But no file matched this creature. It was too large to be a plankton colony, too uniform to be an accumulation of waste, and too active to be decaying organic matter. No internal movement was detected, like organs, nor any electrical signals typical of known animals. The only obvious thing was that it behaved like an organism, though it did not respond like one. As often happens in such cases, the scientific community reacted with caution. Some suggested it could be an unknown species of giant tunicate, a type of marine animal usually found on the seabed, which in its larval stage has strange and variable forms. Others mentioned the possibility of a mutated abyssal jellyfish, adapted to the extreme temperatures of the Arctic. Some even proposed it could be a form of colonial life, like certain bacteria or protists that organize into multicellular structures without forming a complete being. But all those hypotheses had one problem. None explained the size. The Arctic blob measured, according to the video scale, almost 4 meters wide in its most compact form, and when it expanded, it covered an area greater than 7 meters. That dimension, in a soft-bodied organism without a skeleton, visible tissue, or an apparent propulsion system, was completely foreign to any existing taxonomic classification. And the most perplexing thing is that, after that first encounter, similar sightings have been reported, always under similar conditions. Extremely cold waters, low salinity, in areas far from human activity. In each case, the creature behaves in the same way. It floats, reacts, and disappears. Marine biologists who have tried to approach the phenomenon acknowledge that there is something deeply anomalous in its behavior. Some have suggested that the blob is not an animal, but a type of soft intelligence, a life form completely different, based on a logic that has nothing to do with organs or traditional cellular structures. A body that has no center, that does not need a skeleton or fixed direction, and that can adapt to the environment without altering its state. In simpler terms, it would be a thinking entity without a nervous system, a living mass that perceives its environment through the entirety of its body. It may seem like an extreme theory, but it is not far removed from what has already been observed in certain types of unicellular molds that learn patterns, or in some colonies of bacteria that react to external stimuli as if making decisions. The difference, of course, is the scale. The Arctic blob is not an invisible colony to the human eye. It is a creature that occupies space, that has presence, that imposes silence with its mere existence. And if it is true that it has appeared more than once, if it truly moves through those unknown waters of the far north, then we are facing something that current biology has not yet been able to recognize. Speculation, of course, has had its say. Some have linked the blob to other sightings of shapeless masses in different parts of the planet, from creatures seen in the depths of the Gulf of Mexico to poorly documented reports in Antarctica. Some have even said it could be an ancient form of life, a prehistoric organism that never went extinct, simply because it lived in an ecosystem that did not need to evolve. A primitive creature in appearance, but perfectly adapted to withstand cold, pressure, and darkness. Others, bolder still, have proposed even more radical ideas. That the blob could be a form of extraterrestrial life, having arrived in the ocean from somewhere else, embedded in the polar ice, a survivor from time. There is no evidence, of course, and science does not support such theories without proof. But the lack of answers, the rarity of the phenomenon, and the impossibility of classifying what has been seen leave the door open to wonder. Today, the case of the Arctic blob remains one of the most curious and unresolved in marine study. There are records, recordings, water sample analyses from the area, but no captured specimen, no confirmed DNA, no conclusive article. It is a floating mystery, something that is seen but not caught, a creature that does not respond to knowledge but challenges it. And perhaps, in that silent resistance, lies its message, that there are still life forms waiting to be named, waiting to be understood. The ocean has not finished telling us all it knows, and as we continue to explore its most remote edges, beings that do not fit will keep appearing, creatures without explanation, like the Arctic blob, a reminder that the sea is not only deep in kilometers, it is also deep in mystery. The sunken city of the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of the state of Gujarat in northwestern India, where the waters of the Gulf of Cambay swirl in brown eddies due to the currents of the Indus River and the melting of the Himalayas, lies a place that has defied everything we believe we know about the origins of civilizations. Beneath those murky waters, in an area forgotten and difficult to explore due to the violence of the currents, a team of scientists made a discovery that could rewrite history if what many already suspect is confirmed. It was not a sculpture, nor a solitary object. It was an entire city, a network of straight structures, streets, walls, and shapes that can only be explained by human hands. A sunken city that, according to some estimates, could be over 9,000 years old. The story begins in 2001, when the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, in collaboration with underwater archaeologists, launched a seabed scanning project in the Gulf region. They were using side-scan sonar technology, not with the intention of finding lost cities, but to analyze the sediments of the delta. However, what the images revealed left everyone speechless. Straight lines crossing at precise angles, outlines of structures forming grids, foundations hidden beneath meters of silt, an urban pattern covered by time and water that did not resemble anything natural. The first reaction was disbelief. India has a millennia-long history, but the civilizations we know, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, the Indus Valley, are not that old. The traditional chronology places the emergence of cities around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, but what the sonar showed in Cambay seemed much older. Preliminary dating, based on organic samples taken from the seabed, gave dates of over 9,000 years, which would place this city in an era where, according to history books, humanity was still developing agriculture. Such a possibility quickly ignited debate. Some archaeologists argued that these formations were nothing more than effects of the currents, that the aligned stones were the result of the natural movement of sediments and geological fragments. But this explanation did not match the symmetry, nor the objects that began to surface. Because it wasn't just stones. Soon they began recovering tools, pieces of worked wood, ceramic fragments, polished stone beads, and most significantly, human teeth, bones, and remains that had been hidden for thousands of years under the silt of the Gulf. Carbon tests on several of these items produced consistent results. The human remains were dated to around the 7th millennium BCE, and some materials even earlier. This wasn't debris carried by the river, nor recent accumulations. They were parts of an organized civilization, settled, capable of building, manufacturing, and possibly even writing. If this is confirmed, we would be talking about a culture older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older even than any other city known to archaeology. The problem is that the site is extremely difficult to study. The waters of the Gulf of Cambay are among the murkiest in the world. Visibility is zero, and the currents change every hour, sweeping away sediments that cover everything not firmly anchored. Human dives are practically impossible, and robot probes only work for a few minutes before being swept away or losing signal. It's as if nature itself is defending this place, preventing it from being easily unearthed. Despite this, the sonar images are compelling. They show a city covering several square kilometers, with a design that doesn't seem improvised. There are parallel streets, regular intersections, what could be open squares, circular areas that some have interpreted as wells or temples, all buried under centuries of sediment, but laid out with such clarity that there's no room for doubt. And then comes the big question. Who were the people who lived there? The boldest hypotheses speak of an unidentified civilization, which could have flourished before the last great thaw, when sea levels were much lower, and large areas of land now submerged were habitable. According to some models, the Gulf of Cambay may have been a fertile plain at that time, with access to rivers, favorable climate, and abundant resources. An ideal place for early human settlements, which would later have been slowly swallowed by the rising sea level. If true, this city could have been submerged in a gradual process, not through catastrophe, but simply buried by the passage of time and the ocean. Others, however, see the trace of a more dramatic event. There are geological signs that the region was shaken by earthquakes in the distant past, which could have caused a sudden collapse of the land. In this hypothesis, the city would have been swallowed in a single event, as if the earth itself had given way beneath its inhabitants' feet. This would explain why many of the objects found are intact, with no signs of abandonment or prolonged wear from use, as if everything had been frozen in an instant. Beyond how it happened, what astonishes is the level of development that can be inferred. The tools are refined, the beads are perfectly perforated. Some fragments appear to have decorative patterns. We are not talking about nomadic tribes or gatherers, but about a structured, settled society with its own culture. And yet, there is no record of them anywhere else. No texts, no legends that speak of a city predating the known ones. It's as if they had existed and then disappeared without leaving more trace than those stones buried at the bottom of the sea. And in the silence, the city of Cambay remains there, submerged, intact, waiting. It's not part of tourism, nor does it appear in textbooks. It's a half-discovered secret, a fragment of history that is uncomfortable because it doesn't fit into the accepted timelines. But what cannot be denied is that it is there, in the mud, in the currents that cover it, in the images that have not been fully released, and in the objects that keep emerging to the surface one by one, as if the past refuses to stay completely buried. Perhaps one day, with better tools and more determination, the city of Cambay will be explored as it deserves. Its plans can be raised, its buildings reconstructed, and the faces of those who inhabited it may be known. But until then, it will remain a ghost city beneath the sea, a silent reminder that the history of humanity is not as written as we think. The buzz of the global ocean, the vibration that never stops. Beneath the surface of the world's seas, beyond the gaze of satellites and the sensitivity of any human ear, there is a constant hum, a faint, low, deep vibration. This is not a fleeting sound or a localized phenomenon. It is everywhere. It spreads across all the oceans, day and night, for years. It has no defined origin, nor a clear direction, but it persists, always. As if the earth itself had a background frequency, a kind of mechanical breath, as if the planet were speaking very slowly from its depths, and no one yet knew how to fully listen to it. Scientists call it the background seismic hum or persistent oceanic seismic noise. It was discovered at the end of the last century, almost by accident, when seismographs installed to study earthquakes began detecting a constant, low-frequency vibration that didn't match any registered seismic, volcanic, or tectonic event. It was a signal that didn't stop, that remained when there were no plate movements, no storms, or waves. A kind of background murmur that appeared in all the records, regardless of the planet's location where the instruments were placed. At first, it was thought that it might be technical interference, perhaps from the wind, the machinery of ships, or poorly filtered human noise. But over time, studies became more precise. More sensitive seismographs were installed in places far from civilization, and the hum was still there. Then, the experiments were repeated under different climatic conditions, with calm seas or storms, and the signal persisted, as if it didn't depend on the weather or the surface environment. It was something deeper, more structural, an echo buried in the very foundations of the planet. Over the years, and thanks to the cross-referencing of data collected by seismic stations worldwide, some of its frequencies were isolated. The vibration moves in an extremely low range, around 3 to 7 millihertz, well below what any human can hear. To perceive it, it must be amplified thousands of times. But once that is done, a signal is revealed that is not uniform, but fluctuates slightly. It changes with the seasons, the pressure of the ocean, and even with the tides. It is as if the sea itself emitted a kind of constant pulse, a dull and prolonged beat that travels through the world's depths. Researchers have proposed several hypotheses. The most accepted one is that the hum is generated by the interaction between sea waves and the ocean floor, specifically by the collision of waves coming from opposite directions that, when they collide, transmit energy downward, creating small vibrations that are amplified and propagate through the Earth's crust. It is an elegant and plausible explanation, fitting with what we know about the transmission of energy. But as with all great mysteries, it doesn't fully close the story, because there are details that don't quite add up. For example, the intensity of the hum doesn't always correspond with the surface activity of the sea. In some areas, the vibration remains the same for long periods, even though the wave activity changes. In others, it seems to strengthen for no apparent reason. And the most puzzling, there are regions of the ocean floor where the signal amplifies strangely, as if something in the structure of the seabed resonated more strongly, amplifying that invisible murmur until it becomes something almost physical, detectable even in the structures of coastal laboratories. These resonance points, as geophysicists call them, have been found in places so distant from each other that a single source cannot be considered. One is off the coast of Greenland, another near the Japanese archipelago, one more in the central part of the Atlantic Ocean, and another in the South Pacific, near Point Nemo. And in all of them, the pattern repeats. The hum intensifies slightly, remains stable for days or weeks, and then fades, as if following an unknown rhythm. Some have compared this global vibration to the song of a whale no one has seen, a voice speaking from the inside of the planet. Some associate it with deep volcanic activity, geological processes not yet understood, or even with the so-called slow earthquakes, which occur over weeks and may be causing a type of constant friction at the plate boundaries. These are possible theories, yes, but none fully explain why the hum is so stable, so omnipresent, and above all, so ancient. Because if there is one thing that surprises even more, it is that this hum is not recent. When reviewing ancient records, seismologists have found evidence that this vibration has been present since measurements first existed. It is in the early seismograms of the 20th century, although it wasn't understood at that time. It is in the files of military submarines that monitored the seabed during the Cold War. It is even in some acoustic recordings made by scientists who weren't looking for this, but found it unintentionally. And then a more fascinating possibility arises. What if this vibration has been present long before instruments were made to detect it? What if the ocean has been humming quietly since the beginning, marking a rhythm that no one had noticed until now. It would perhaps be the most constant manifestation of the planet's inner life, a sound that doesn't belong to any culture, animal, or machine. A sound that is simply the Earth, in its purest form, vibrating under its own skin. Some oceanographers have begun studying whether this hum could affect marine life. Whales and other cetaceans depend on sound for everything: navigation, hunting, communication. If there is a permanent background hum, although inaudible to us, it may be part of their natural perception of the environment. Perhaps they use it as a reference. Perhaps they ignore it. Or maybe it's so ancient that it has already become part of the ocean's balance, like pressure, temperature, or salinity. It's just there. Whatever it is, the global ocean hum does not stop. It spreads across the ocean ridges, passes through tectonic faults, rises along coastlines, and even filters into the interior of continents. It is a weak signal, but constant, a sustained note that floats beneath the feet of all living beings on the planet. It doesn't warn, it doesn't change, it doesn't threaten, but it is there, always. And that is perhaps the most unsettling thing. Because in a world that seems to change constantly, where everything moves, breaks, or transforms, there is something in that vibration that remains. It's as if the sea holds a secret, and its way of keeping it is by whispering it continuously for millennia. Perhaps one day we will understand it. Perhaps we will discover that behind that murmur is a code, a message, or simply an echo of what we were before we knew we were listening. If this journey into the unknown depths of the ocean left your mind spinning, imagine all that's still yet to be discovered. Tell me in the comments which of these mysteries left you the most stunned. And if this type of content grabs your attention, leave a like and subscribe. There are many more secrets to explore.